All right, it's Friday. That means we are back with another edition of Punk Rock Politics. I'm Mitch Maley, joined by local radio legend Henry Rains back in the house this week, and comedian and I heard also magician Alex Boyce.
Hey, how you doing?
Apparently there's a magician by your name. Henry brought that up.
No, I've never done a magic trick in my life other than seeming competent on this show.
All right, so we've had a big week, and we've got a lot going on. One thing that happened was Purdue Pharma revealed its plan to end billionaire Sackler family's control over the company, but the deal that they put forward is pretty advantageous for Purdue Pharma. Has anybody seen this? No.
Yeah, I think I saw that the Sacklers agreed to pay an additional $4.3 billion to states in fines to help them get away with this.
But they're doing it in a really cool way in which they're extending it out, and then they're also, a lot of what they're paying is going to be done in giving discounted addiction treatment drugs. And all of this will be over time so they can be paid off of that beautiful interest rather than the principal of their fortunes.
And they have stakes in the anti-opiate drugs as well.
Yes.
They have positions in the things that help to prevent death from opiate overdose.
Well, you get them coming, you get them going, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And that's what they're going to sell at a discount. And Alex and I brought this up the other day. Great documentary series. Anybody interested in checking it out, I'd highly recommend it. It's a British guy. He does documentaries for the BBC. He's been doing them for about 40 years. His name is Adam Curtis, and he has a new series that came out. It's 6 parts. I've watched the whole thing. It's excellent. It's called Can't Get You Out of My Head, and it's really about, what he's known for. Curtis does this marvelous job of dispassionately looking at the world and politics and sort of trying to find the themes and connect the dots without really saying prescriptively, here's what we need to change, here's what we need to do. So there's not really an agenda that's really forecast, but the theme in these 6 episodes is that we're in the age of the individual, and how the age of the individual and how what we've really had is this push and pull back and forth between individuality and people-led movements, group-led movements,
collective ideas.
Individualism versus collectivism really is what is this, back and forth that society tends to take. And, he goes into a lot of how the age of individuality makes us a lot more susceptible to a lot of the modern political themes. So very fascinating series. I would highly recommend it. I really liked, in 2016, he put out a 1-part documentary called Hypernormalization, which is my favorite. Yeah. And then I went back and watched some of his older ones afterward as well.
Century of the South.
Yes,
in,
very
2002 is very good. He goes into a lot of Edward Bernays and the history of the public relations industry, which is utterly fascinating in terms of our psychology today. But one thing from...
and I've noticed, and it's really interesting with that connection, I've noticed a lot of common themes between him and Howard Bloom, who of course wrote Lucifer Principle. And Howard Bloom's this amazing genius autodidact who went from, I think he was in Harvard when he was a teenager or something like that. Like, he was this extreme intellectual. And then he actually went into PR and became the biggest PR guy for decades. He was Michael Jackson's PR guy, like every big musician for about 20 years. And he was basically just saying, once you really understand human psychology real well, doing public relations is the easiest thing in the world.
You sort of lost me on the age of the individual, because I feel like I'm in the age of the individual revenue stream. And going back to what you were talking with the anti-opiate medication, is it really anti-opiate medication, or they're going to be supplying the opioid addiction maintenance medications? Because I knew an anti-opiate doctor that was doing this way back when people weren't, before the pill mills, back when you had to go on, the old-fashioned one, you had to go on the internet to get your opioids.
Right.
And I asked her, I said, well, aren't these things that you're prescribing? Because the way that practice worked up, you bought the anti-opioid addiction medicine from her. I said, well, but these are controlled substances too. Aren't they narcotic? She goes, well, technically. And I said, so, but you wean them off then. She goes, well, I like to sort of leave it up to the individual and what they feel they're capable of to do it.
Well, that's why Wall Street came in and started investing in methadone clinics. And that was one of the things that came out in a lot of the prospectuses was, hey, you know what's really great? People never get off this. On methadone, there is no plan to wean. There's actually not even a protocol for it. It's just designed to say, well, you don't have to go around getting your hit. You can function. You can work. You can come in and get that shot once a week, stand in line for it, get it, and then you can go and have a job and do all the different things.
Yeah.
But you'll be on this methadone forever, and we like forever.
And one of the firms that was behind this push, and I like to name firms. I think it's important to know the specific companies that do this, but the big firm that apparently was behind this push was McKinsey.
God damn it, they're one of our sponsors, Alex.
Oh, shit. Sorry, guys. I love McKinsey.
I'm just kidding. We have no sponsors. Go ahead.
Oh, thank God. But McKinsey, starting in the late 90s, they're a business consulting firm, and they started advising Purdue Pharmaceuticals and their investors.
Is this the McKinsey that Pete Buttigieg?
Yes,
It
Sam
sure is.
McKinsey. Yep, he has an NDA in terms of being able to talk about it because they do evil things. But one of the things that McKinsey pioneered with Purdue specifically was a rebate program for customers of their drugs, mothers and fathers whose kids had died and overdosed on their OxyContin. So Purdue would offer through because of the advisement from McKinsey, they would give a rebate to the parents of people who died on opiates in order to keep buying the opiates. So there'd be an offer, hey, we'll give you a discount on the OxyContin if you keep buying it because your son died. And that was one of the, it's evil. That was one of the things that McKinsey, one of the routes to, more revenue streams that they pioneered with Purdue.
And that is evil. One of the things that we were both surprised to learn in that documentary series was that the scion of the family was Arthur Sackler.
Arthur Sackler, yeah.
Actually invented Valium.
Yeah, I didn't know that.
No,
I wasn't
neither
aware
did I.
that the Sacklers were so deep into our, pharmacology.
Well, just think that, one guy's family did Valium and opioids.
And Valium is a benzodiazepine, like in the same family, just for people that don't know, it's like Xanax,
Yes,
and things like that, which was originally, and I didn't realize this either until I watched the documentary, that was originally marketed for, housewives that had, anxiety, quote unquote.
Yeah, and he ties that in very interestingly to the move to the suburbs.
Yes.
And I've heard this before, and I find this very fascinating in that human nature, evolving over hundreds of thousands of years of modern humans, the vast majority of our time we've spent with a tremendous amount of worry about being safe from being attacked by something and being able to eat. And the vast majority of our time has been scarcity for food and imminent threat from predators. And as a result, we have, I remember the first time I heard this was a Penn psychologist, and he was explaining the concept of a paper tiger. And he said, one of the things that you have to understand about stress is that a lot of the mechanisms that we have in our body are designed over, hundreds of thousands of years of evolution to live in a different world. And he talked about that idea when people say that I just froze, I was like a deer in headlights. And he said that moment, physiologically, what we can see happening is blood actually rushes out of your brain. And one of the reasons is the evolutionary imperative there is thinking is a bad idea. Weighing out risk, doing anything is a bad idea. So your body does not want your brain to start directing you at that point.
Yeah, your body doesn't want you to do anything that's not related to your skeletal muscular system because
so
that's all you need to either fight or
Where does all
fly.
that blood mostly go? To your ass and your legs.
So you can bounce.
So you can jump or run. Those are the two things that mostly you have to do as a human if a predator, if there's a danger. So
yeah.
he explained that very, very seldom is it a jaguar jumping out of the bush that we have to be worried about, but our body reacts to stuff like mortgage stress or,
or loneliness.
Yes, with the kind of mechanisms that are designed for a different world.
It's one of the reasons.
How come when I get stressed out about the mortgage, I don't get giant quadriceps then?
The blood goes there, Henry. All you got to do is jump. But you're jumping for the upper shelf where the cookies are at.
It's one of the reasons that people who are chronically stressed can often have things like IBS or colon issues, stomach issues, because like you said, when you're under that chronic stress, blood flow goes away from non-essential systems like your brain and your digestive tract. So that constant flow of blood away from those essential systems are going to leave you with digestive issues.
And it's also why the urge for defecation often comes when people get nervous and anxious.
Absolutely.
Because if you watch an animal that's under attack, they will defecate real quick to drop their weight in order to run faster, which is why, it's very common. In fact, when I used to be a pro boxer, one of the common problems you'd have is people would have to go number 2 before a fight. And once you have your hands wrapped and signed by a commissioner, that might be an hour and a half before the fight. You have to go then and get them untaped, and then you have to get them re-inspected and all these things if you take your gloves off. So it's always a problem if somebody has to go to a bathroom after the commissioner signed.
And to tie it back into the suburbs and the sort of medicating of the suburban mind that seems to have started in the 70s, we're also fundamentally social creatures.
Yes.
We're a very social species. So the idea of living in this in a suburban landscape where we're kind of together but alone is also it's not a state that we're used to sort of existing in as human beings, being surrounded by all those people, but kind of being alone with your sort of family unit. That's another
it makes us
stifling
anxious.
thing.
It makes us anxious, and it makes us fearful. And there's been a lot of work done on the idea of why cities tend to be more liberal and rural enclaves tend to be more conservative. And one of them is, hey, listen, if you're in a city, it behooves you to work with other people and trust other people and open yourself up to other people, because that cooperation and that protecting each other and having relationships is beneficial when everybody's sharing close space. When you are out in the rural hamlets and your neighbor's not right up against you and you're not running into hundreds of people, by the time you get your coffee, you tend to be a little bit more skeptical of other human beings, especially outsiders, strangers, people who look and talk different, because you view everything as a potential threat. There's been a lot on that as well.
Yeah, and it's interesting to note that the Sacklers have been so deeply embedded in our sort of pharmacological anesthesia towards the problems of suburban life and to the loneliness and the anxiety. It's again, that documentary Can't Get You Out of My Head by Adam Curtis was a great exploration of that particular theme, which I did not know.
Yeah, so that's for free on YouTube right now. 6 parts. They're between an hour and almost 2 hours on the last episode.
Worth it, though.
Definitely worth it. Another one I was just telling Henry about, Showtime has a documentary called The Reagans, and it's 4 parts, and it is excellent. It's really, really a great, Reagan was the first president. I was a very young kid, but my family was very
greatest
involved
president to ever star in a movie.
I don't know. I've seen some of his movies.
Oh, well, name me one better president starring in a movie.
Well, Donald Trump wasn't Home Alone.
I don't think that surpasses.
That doesn't surpass
Bedtime with Bongo.
Yeah.
Oh, and then the one where he met his second wife.
There are some really, really interesting things in there. One of them was in the early ones. Obviously, there's been other work done on Reagan's conversion from a liberal Democrat union organizer to a fierce conservative. One of the things I didn't realize was his mother had remarried to, when he was a little bit older, but to a real right-wing physician. And then even as an adult, that gentleman had a tremendous amount of influence on, hey, I don't really think you're on the right team with these unions and different things, and influencing his political conversion. But then the other part that I wasn't as much aware to was the impact of the war. So where the vast majority of the country, able-bodied young men, served, abroad, Reagan did not. And Reagan served with the RKO had this thing where they would make training films and different things. So he served there, and then he always, or at least they
he found his highest utility.
They gave the impression that he always maybe was a little bit jealous of like the Jimmy Stewart types who were actual war heroes and were treated a different way when they came back to Hollywood.
George Bush Sr.
Yeah. And the way that he kind of made up for it was playing a lot of roles where he was a hero soldier.
Wasn't he the Gipper also?
He was, yeah.
Yeah, so he was a great athlete and a great warrior, and I guess that's why we all admire him now. But what you were talking about, his stepdad, the right-wing doctor, which it just made me flash on one of those anecdotal things that sort of ties into everything that is in the ethos around us. 1965, that was about the time Medicare came in. We talk about Medicare for all now. And when I would go see the doctor, and I don't know, I had bronchitis or something, so I would have been in there every couple months or something. And, Ronald Reagan had that vinyl record that went around. It was anti-Medicare. It was socialism, just like Medicare for all now is socialism and all that other stuff that we still hear. And the doctor that was our family doctor, he would be like preaching to my mother about how this Medicare was going to bring socialized medicine to America and how everything was going to be horrible in the medical profession there. And now in this state, 55, 6+ years later, I can still remember him banging the whatever was next to him in the exam room.
That's actually in episode 1 or 2.
Yeah, about what the Medicare was going, and I didn't know what Medicare was when I was 8 years old, but I do know now that it was probably one of the greatest advancements in healthcare in America, especially obviously for seniors, until the ACA. So that was my sidebar to your discussion.
Third one, since we're on reviews or recommendations for videos, man, last week I should say, 2 really, really great films. One of them, Sullivan and I watched. He was off for his birthday on St. Patrick's Day, and we watched The Trial of the Chicago 7 on Netflix. Anybody seen it?
No.
Oh,
You mean on the news every night?
well,
Yeah, I remember that too.
Yeah, excellent movie. Sacha Baron Cohen as Abby Hoffman steals the show, and then Michael Keaton comes in with a cameo as Johnson's Attorney General. Help me, Henry. You lived through this.
Oh, the Attorney General for
For Johnson, yeah. He was an actual general. He was the first military general who became an attorney general.
Mitchell was Nixon's.
Yes, it was. So what
he was only there.
What they delve into a long time, or in the movie, is the idea that this guy snubbed Mitchell when he came in because he didn't resign until 1 hour before inauguration before the swearing in, to make it more complicated. And that's why they thought that's why they called him as a witness, because they actually thought that he brought the case as sort of a fuck you back to the previous AG. But what was really, really powerful about it, and he used the transcripts for the script and everything so you have an accurate depiction of the trial itself, was this looks like what my son would have imagined could only happen in a kangaroo court in a third world country. I mean, this is not a legitimate legal proceeding, and it was overturned in the courts, thankfully, so nobody, served time under it. But it was just a complete farce.
Jaworski?
Yeah. And I mean, he was horrific. And it was just a farcical miscarriage of justice. And it shows the powers of the state when they're allowed to be used against peaceful dissent. And it also shows us, and why I think everybody should watch it, how close we are historically to that happening. That is something that happened in the 1960s. So we're not talking about 100 years ago.
That's never going to happen again.
Right?
No, it's not, because now they'll be tracking you much earlier than that. And
You'll never get to Chicago. You'll never get to Chicago, Mitch. It ain't happening. No, but when they come and they say...
What about the assassination... Oh, did I say the word assassination? Of the different Black Panthers around the country by law enforcement?
Yes.
And, it's just like that doesn't happen anymore either. So
well, that was the
point.
other... The Black Messiah was the other movie that I watched recently, which is on that theme, and is also because Bobby Seals was included in that trial with the Chicago 7, just as a way to say, hey, we want to put a panther up there to make them look even scarier. But that was another great film, so that was the other one. So highest recommendations on those. Go out and check them out, especially since there's not a whole lot else to do. The IRS confirmed it would push back tax day by 1 month. The new deadline will be May 17th, 2 days later than a congressional aide initially said. European Union's drug regulatory agency said this week that AstraZeneca vaccine doesn't increase the overall incidence of blood clots and that the benefits of using it outweigh possible risks, paving the way for European countries to resume dispensing the shots. So it turns out that blood clots are no more likely to happen with them than with the general population. However, there are some concerns that there have been a couple kinds of rare blood clots happening in incidences higher for lower ages. So it's something they're going to keep an eye on, but it's not like there's an epidemic of some sort of, unsuccessful.
I think if we had this kind of frequency and other vaccines that follow the normal timeline, they would have had time to cover this up by now. And it would have been gone to the marketing department. It would be out there because really, no, I'm actually validating your point with an attempt at humor there, but because the statistics, even in the occurrence right now, it's not that much.
Right.
I actually got my first Moderna vaccine here in Manatee County, which
You got it this afternoon, right?
I actually got to go in this morning through even though it's like airtight security there, but they didn't really look at my driver's license. They didn't really want anything to show what time I had printed out the consent form. I was with someone whose time was at 10 o'clock and mine was at 3 o'clock, and we just both handed in the papers and we went on through. But anyway, who gets in the line to disrupt the whole 1,000-car line? You don't do that. But anyway, it's one of the best, most efficient things I've ever seen. It got to be in the top 10 surprisingly efficient activities. Of course, they've been doing it for a month, but
right. Listen, the Biden administration gets a lot of credit for the vaccine rollout. There's no question that this is, for the logistical challenges that we had, and that it wasn't, kicked off very well. They seem to have gotten it, really down pat. And the idea that we're going to have a good chunk of the population by the end of May vaccinated. I'm getting mine on Monday.
Well, that's the distribution that he was in charge of. This was this was better than any line at Disney or Universal.
Oh, right.
I mean, this was
so on a local level, you have the implementation part, that has to be in place for distribution to work well.
Well, I think that the person I was with works for Sarasota County, and someone she was works with said that these kind of events, this is like Christmas in some ways for the emergency planning department, because they war game these things out for years in advance, and now they actually got a chance to implement it.
Right.
So it's like that surface between the feds and the state is a great place to screw things up between the state and the county.
Yes, yeah. So if you don't have the state and county resources rolling it out, then the federal government can do nothing, because the other problem with this is that just getting it there is half the battle, because if it's not getting distributed, particularly the Pfizer and the, what are the first two? The ones
Moderna.
Moderna that have been kept at colder temperatures.
Now,
yeah. So you end up with spoilage, but I'm getting mine on Monday. You know from who? The VA, Henry. They just texted me and said, "Hey, Mitch, would you like to get the vaccine? We got one for you. Can you come up Monday?"
Are you baiting me with another Medicare VA debate?
What time
here?
is best for you? When would you like to come? We'll have it any time. We've got cookies. So I'm getting my vaccine on Monday.
Alex must be so jealous of us with our bodies that are breaking down. Me with the 20-year advance on you, but still,
I'm a high mileage car though, Henry.
Yes,
I've got just as many. I might be a 20-year younger model, but I've got more miles on it.
Either way, he's a pristine. I mean, his Carfax is
it is
spotless.
not, man. I've seen what he does to his body. If you see what this guy orders through Taco Bell just on a weekly basis.
Well, you can put crappy gas in your car for the first
year. Only for so long, man. Those rings burn out.
Yeah, I'm 52. I'm moisturized, so I just look young, but I'm very old.
All right, what's the next story? We've got AstraZeneca. We've got, here's another good one. There was this interesting CNN reporter went out to a diner Wednesday, it was, and it was in Oklahoma. And it was a crowded diner, and you could tell it wasn't staged or anything. And they just started asking people about the vaccine. And the guy was shocked every single person was like, I ain't getting it. I ain't getting it. I ain't getting it. Ain't putting that in me. So that's going to be the challenge as we go further. And most of these people said, well, we can get herd immunity anyway, not understanding that the vaccine is a big part of the herd immunity. So that is, and what was interesting is they said, did you vote for Trump? They all said yes. And they said, what if he came out and really full-throated, said, get it. I got it. He goes, he kind of did it, but he also snuck, they snuck and got it in January, all his people. But every person responded said it wouldn't matter.
Alex, as Dennis was telling us that, I got the feeling like you just never know where you're going to find a silver lining.
So next one we've got also, this will bring us into our next topic, the delegation trips to the border and apocalyptic warnings about what's happening on immigration. I should have known there was a concerted effort because it was really interesting to me that you had all of a sudden comments on my column asking me, why am I repeating on this commissioner who gave herself the VIP list on the vaccine when there's a border crisis going on? And several of the comments said border crisis. And I was like, wait a minute, what's this common thread of border crisis? And then this week it all started rolling out. So I guess the early real far right stuff had rolled this out last week. But now we're back on the border crisis and what's happening. So I thought it'd be a good dive to go into immigration a little bit. And we've got, two parts of it. So you have, but I would imagine that most Republicans would be happy with Biden's, policy of saying, we want you to remain in place in Mexico. We do not want to bring you in if you're seeking asylum. We want to have the asylum process start to happen in place, not here while you're being detained. These seem like what you would want if your goal was not to bring more problem populations into the United States. So I'm not sure what the Republicans are all upset about, especially since you just had 4 years with your guy, 2 years controlling all of the branches of government. And by branches, I'm saying branches, including the courts, and you didn't build the wall. You didn't have Mexico pay for it. We didn't have comprehensive immigration reform even have a stab at. So where are we at with this?
Well,
Henry?
All you have to do is look back to the time that we didn't have an immigration problem, which was right about before the Europeans started to come over to the New World. And it was that terrible border policy, immigration policy of the Native Americans that started the downhill slide on letting anybody in this country. County, too. We got that problem.
Or the caribou when they let those
but
Native Americans come over.
There's two things going on, and more than that, really. But the two things that you were mentioning about, when they talk about Biden causing these problems, the problem is they think that we're going to have, the people that are trying to get in, that we're going to have a humane immigration policy, because that is a big difference for 4 years. So now's the time to go. I mean, if you've been waiting for 4 years, you go. The other part is that it's really not that humane, because if you look at the Obama administration, they were pretty tight on the border.
Yeah, there wasn't that much of space between Obama and Trump at the border.
Yeah, that's a good point. And just to bring it back to something we were talking about earlier, McKinsey was one of the consultant firms that ICE used to tighten costs and to reduce costs. And some of the things that they recommended were taking away medicine that they were giving, to reducing times in the cafeteria to eat food, taking away basic comforts for like sleeping, like blankets. And it was reported that in that meeting between ICE and McKinsey, even the ICE people were going, "Whoa, that's a little too far." So you can kind of gauge the psychopathy of an organization when ICE is going, "Hey, that's a little too harsh."
Isn't it almost like McKinsey is like, hey, we'll come in and give you a completely devoid of conscious, analysis of what you do. And it almost seems like a big part of their value, if you will, is they'll be the ones who say it.
Yep.
So it's almost like, well, it wasn't our idea. We hired the world's most powerful consulting firm.
These
They
pros
recommended
told
it.
us to do it. What are we supposed to do? What are we supposed to do? Give them an extra Tylenol? No, we got to save 50 cents. But I think, in terms of what you're talking about, in terms of the partisanship of it, it's going to be, if Biden says something people on the right are going to hate it, just like if Trump said something, people on the left are going to hate it, no matter what it is, because we're so hyper-partisan.
Well, let me pose it to you guys this way and see what each of you think. I wonder, isn't it diametrically opposed? And this is, and again, not to pick on Trumpers or the right or anything like that, but it seems like there's a flaw in some of that thinking, in that the same people who want to be very isolationist and want to say, hey, we don't want to be, why are we helping people in Honduras? Why are we spending money here and there and the other place? It seems like those same people are then saying, what the hell is going on with the border? It seems to me like you have to either say, look, if we're the richest, most powerful country in the world and we have a, market economy that's bad as it's gotten by historic means in terms of wealth stratification, being poor in the United States is better than being poor almost anywhere in the world. And that's one of the reasons why you have so many people from those despotic places trying to come in here, is that when you compare it to a place like Honduras and you say, they're probably going to draft your son into a gang and have him killing people by the time he's 11, and we won't even go into what they're going to do to your daughters, and there's no job here for you, so good luck eating. And even when people bring in food aid, we've got plans for that as well. But if you get up to this place, you could sleep 15 on a floor in a house and work at a Walmart and have access to a big giant bag of rice for next to nothing, and the dollar board at Burger King and McDonald's, and buses and all kinds of stuff. And it's again the worst level of life that we can imagine here is imminently better than many places in this world. So don't we have like a stake in saying, hey, if we promote stability in these places, there might be less of them knocking on the door?
Yeah, that's true.
That sounds reasonable, which is why it has no point in the discussion. I mean, we can't even agree on the simplest facts in this country. And to fall back on immigration, we've got a third of the country that is just upset, does not want to make an agreement, does not want. I hate to generalize about a third, but it's just true. They don't want to solve problems, or at least they don't want the problem solved in a compromising way. You have the ones in the middle, they're just trying to get by, and then you get the other side that now have the ability to put forward solutions. The one bit of hope that I saw in the last day or so is, with that preface that I just said, I don't think we're going to get any kind of comprehensive immigration reform. But in the House, they're breaking up the legislation into a separate bill for the Dreamers, and then a separate something else for the temporary when you're in danger. My screen went dark.
Some sort of like humanitarian.
Well, temporary deferred status or something like that. Yeah, there you go. I knew. Eventually the hard drive turns.
Got to eat more mushrooms.
See, he's solid state over there. I'm just a hard drive spinning here.
I heard a little bit of the noise.
Yeah, it was there. But anyway, they're going to break that out, and then they also have some goodies for business. Certain sectors are going to have their where the Trump administration has been cutting back, trying to squeeze the number of foreign workers coming in. That's going to be, those are doable bills, because there's going to be a constituency when it comes over to the Senate. It'll get through the House because Nancy runs a tight ship over there and she gets what she wants, at least for now. And the Republicans can take their no vote and they can stay together and they can all be solid Republicans. But then you get it over to the Senate, and do you really want to stop the debate on the Dreamer? Do you want to be the ones? Are there 10 of the 50 senators, 10 of the 50 senators that want to be the ones that get advertisements in the next election about how, and of course senators are statewide, you're not protected by gerrymandering. Do you want to be the one that sent the poor Dreamer home that was working her way through college, taking care of her grandmother, and
that's a tough case
working
to make.
At the Humane Society?
That's a tough case to make.
So you get that one.
Right.
It's always been, we want that part of the whole thing, because they thought that was the bargaining chip that would pull everything else. No, you're lucky to get that.
Right.
The temporary deferred status, I don't think that has much of a chance, but it makes for a nice little wedge issue for the next election for 2022, because again, it's an obvious tug on your heartstrings kind of thing. You can paint it that way. And then, of course, with the industry and the individual sectors, well, then you just have to slice and dice which states you're trying to get workers into, and you can All you have to do is break the debate, break the filibuster, and stop the debate and vote. And then the people don't even have to vote for the bill. They just vote for the debate. They're just for the process.
Alex?
I always I like to appeal when we're talking about immigration back to the history of immigration, in fairly recent history. I've made this point before, it's sort of an academic point, but Adam Smith wrote in Wealth of Nations in 1776 that in order to have a functioning capitalist economy, and he was sort of looking at England as the example, you need to have the freedom of movement across borders of capital, and you also need to have the freedom of movement across borders of labor.
Yes.
In order to have a functioning capitalist economy. Now, what we've had since the early 90s with NAFTA is a extreme liberalization, an extreme opening up of capital markets for things like plants, headquarters, office buildings, to be set up across borders. So, of course, we've talked about this with the Rust Belt. That's where you get GM moving a plant from Detroit down to Monterrey, Mexico, so that they can pay their workers $3 an hour with no benefits instead of, $25 an hour with benefits here. So the liberalization of capital across borders has caused a depression in the labor markets in places like Central America and Mexico, where the wage rates are extremely depressed, and which is great for capital. That's really good to have cheap labor. So a lot of people, subsidized agribusiness is one of the reasons that farmers in Mexico can no longer compete with subsidized American commodity products. So there are people who can't afford to make a living in their home economies anymore, so they try to go to a place where that is possible.
Not only is it possible, a lot of times you come here and you're able to, if you live on a, and listen, I am not in any way, everybody knows that I've been a champion of higher wages, increasing the standard of living and decreasing the wealth stratification. So I'm in no way saying it's easy to be poor here or that poor people get a fair shake by any means. But comparatively, if you're not trying to live the American dream, so to speak, you can live a very modest means here easier than anywhere else. So if you're making, let's say, $12 to $15 an hour and you're used to living a very Spartan life, we've seen examples of somebody coming, making those kind of wages here and sending what ends up being a very, very sizable amount of money on their economy back to their families. I've seen stories, I saw a documentary a little while back where a fisherman from Mexico who had, come illegally into the United States and became a picker because his fishing village was dried up, it was overfished and there was no work. And he was supporting 13 people as a picker. And it showed, it was this humble little village and it was, medicine that grandma needed that she can get for next to nothing in the local pharmacy. And just being able to send back $40, $50, $60 a week was keeping 13 people alive in this village. So, I mean, when you look at that, then we talk about the danger that people face. It wouldn't, anybody that's a parent, I think it's the easiest thing in the world. Like, what would you do, Henry, if your daughter was dying or if gangs were like, we're going to take her now?
Whatever it takes.
You do anything, right? So, I've never had anything but empathy for someone. So, well, they broke the law. I'd break a law, too. If you told me that line.
They broke the civil.
Yes.
A civil.
Not a criminal law. But if somebody told me that line, your son will have a better life and be safe and not dead or a child soldier, there's not much I wouldn't do to get them there. And again, we can't have I don't know anybody who's for open borders.
You can bring it down for just everybody here. You would go into 7-Eleven and steal bread if you were hungry enough.
Absolutely.
So certainly you will do more than that than
so
for your family.
That's not to say that we should have open borders, and that's a trope because I've never heard anybody argue for the open border. I've heard some maybe ham-fisted talking points.
Yeah. No. Again, I always make the distinction: open border for labor. There are open borders, but it's for capital.
Right.
And that's where a lot of the problem comes from. The Yale economist James Tobin in 1971 called it a virtual Senate. in terms of an international virtual Senate, in terms of the power that they have. Because an institution like Goldman Sachs can say to, say, Bolivia, hey, we're going to downgrade your bond credit rating unless you deregulate your labor market. And Goldman Sachs can pull billions of dollars out of the agricultural industry, out of the bond markets, out of any market that they want to, and it can completely devastate a country. And that's not even to say the combinations of financial institutions that can work together in order to get governments to do what they want. So when I try to bring that up when people talk about open borders, it's like you're talking about open borders for people. Open borders for capital and institutions has been that's been a policy for a long time, and that it's more devastating than people moving across borders. Much more devastating.
A funny irony. I'm going to take it back to Alex's thing in a second, but just briefly touching on one thing we talked about off the air, the function of Bitcoin, where it's a lot of individuals that transfer the Bitcoin back to the third world and eliminate all the middlemen and get the money directly to their family. But also, when you talk about the transfer capital and what Goldman Sachs does and things like that, libertarians are, we're for Bitcoin. Everyone I've ever met that claims to be libertarian. I did a Bitcoin show for 2 or 3 years here too, and they're libertarian, no regulation, and we'll use a tort system, and people will be protected that way. And I say, and everybody will be able to go wherever they want, and we'll all just compete by our own skill and labor, and they can come across the border, and hey, they don't even speak our language as well as no, I don't mean that. But to take it back to yours and Adam Smith, always, you can demonize Goldman Sachs or McKinsey. It is in the human spirit that we have always the people at the top control the movement of the people at the bottom. Adam Smith, with him talking about, we're going to have the movement of labor, he's coming from a country where there were serfs, where people were the land. That was
the beginning of the capitalist system.
Up.
Yeah, capitalism was not an established system at the point. He was commenting on something that was not yet a form of economy at that point. Yeah, it was
if you look at the progression for the labor, starting at the bottom, you go from serfs to then the next advance is slavery, then you have indentured servant, then you have sharecroppers, then you have company towns. We are far away from ever have being an ideal or value of society in general that everybody gets to go work where they want.
Yeah, no, that'll never happen. That certainly will never happen, unfortunately,
And speaking of company
towns, get to work from home.
Yeah, isn't that lovely?
Marco Rubio's office emailed me on Friday to ask if I heard that Marco Rubio came out in support of warehouse in Alabama that Amazon has unionizing. Let them unionize, Marco Rubio said. And I responded back immediately, that's wonderful. I can only now imagine it stands to reason that Senator Rubio will become the champion of the PRO Act in the Senate, right? Mm-hmm. Has he come out yet, or would you care to comment? I have yet to hear back.
And you can get a lot of background if you go to the podcast website and listen to last week's show on that.
Yes, a week later, I find out that
he listened and you convinced him.
There's nothing. No. Crickets from Senator Rubio's office. So he apparently is only for unions when he could stick a thumb in an eye of what's seen as a political opponent, but otherwise he's nowhere to be found on the issue. Empty suit, if there ever was one.
Did he come out for unionization at the Tesla factory?
No, just one specific incident.
Okay.
Isn't that something?
Let's talk about the filibuster real quick, too, because Joe Biden made a comment on this, and he seems to be playing to Senator Manchin, who said, hey, I'm not for getting rid of the filibuster, but I think maybe we should make them actually talk again. So to give I know we've talked about this before, but real quick, filibuster is a Senate rule. It's not a law. They can change it whenever they want. And it basically requires 60 votes to get what's called cloture, which then ends debate and allows them to take a vote on it. And if they don't get those 60 votes, they could theoretically keep the debate going. Now, up until a point in time, you actually had to hold the floor the entire time, and nothing happened in the Senate while this was going on. So there was some serious pain to it, and that confirmations couldn't happen if it was early in an administration, or even judicial confirmations and so forth. So there's a lot of different, ways that would impact it. And Biden saying, hey, go back to the way it was when I was in the Senate, make there be some pain. And I don't think, and it has become increasingly common. And now we kind of just have this rule where it's like, well, Mitch McConnell's rule, in fact, was if you don't have 60, we're not even going to go to the floor with it. So it's become this thing where it's, the unwritten rule is we don't even talk about things in the Senate unless you got your 60 votes. Do you guys think that putting the pain back in it, so to speak, would make a difference? Henry?
Yes, because
people need to pay,
here's
right?
Henry talking about the old days. But back during, I can still remember Walter Cronkite back when news was only on 30 minutes a day, that seeing the filibusters during the civil rights era and the senators trying to stop it. And eventually someone broke the filibuster and civil rights legislation moved forward. And, it happened and it did scum up the works, but it didn't happen on every bill. And I think there's something else that another proposal that got shot down, but it actually would have been okay, is that the opposition party had to keep 41 senators on the floor of the Senate the entire time, always 24/7, until it resolved one way or the other that the advocates gave up, or two of the 41 had to go to the restroom at the same time.
What do you think, Alex? Make them hold in their pee or not?
Well, to me, the two biggest problems that I see in our society are Fed money printing policies and the fact that are you guys familiar with the Cantillon effect? The idea that the people who are closest to the money printing are the first beneficiaries of it. The people who are closest to the money printing get 0% interest rates on their fresh money. To me, those are the two biggest drivers of inequality. Will a filibuster do anything to anything to dent that? No, but it will maybe put a monkey wrench in some of the worst policies that are coming through the pike. But again, I don't see international corporate power being dented at all by something like a filibuster.
Do we have a student of the Austrian School of Economics here with us?
No,
definitely not. Definitely
okay.
MMT a little bit. I like modern monetary theory, but yeah, I think most of the social ills come down to Fed money printing policies, as well as the fact that people closest to the money printing, the big banks, institutional investors, get 0% while your credit card's 18. That's an interest rate apartheid, if you will.
Yeah, and that's
which is
what
not
I
my
was talking
term.
about, the cheap money for so long, which Henry and I were talking about this a little bit last week, in that the failure for price discovery to ever happen in the market and the inflation that we're seeing in asset prices because there's so much of this cheap money chasing returns that it ends up driving up cost of assets.
May I question
Absolutely.
the gentleman here?
You may dialogue.
So explain to me what you were saying again about the 0%. Who gets that?
So the Fed will print. I mean, they don't print, but they will digitally create money.
Right.
And
increase the money supply.
Yes, and the people who are the closest to the Fed in terms of the recipients of that money, which are going to be, like we were talking about, the big banks, Goldman Sachs, J.P. Morgan, the large asset managers, BlackRock, Vanguard, institutions like that, they will get that money at 0.1-2%
Now,
interest.
wait a minute. Do the banks get it or BlackRock gets it?
Both. Large
how is
institutional
BlackRock getting
investors.
it?
They have accounts with the Fed. So there are, I think, 36 institutions that have accounts with the Fed.
What does BlackRock put that money into?
Securities, for the
What
most
kind?
part. Like any stocks, that's their primary product are money market
BlackRock
funds.
gets to buy stock equity with the money that they're getting from the Fed.
or property.
They don't loan the money.
BlackRock, no. Well, they could loan it to like another company. They could loan it to a hedge fund. They could loan it to whoever they want. In fact, private equity firms are becoming the largest private credit facilitators in the market today, like institutions like Blackstone.
For that reason, because they have access to so much
they have
cheap money
access to cheap money. Whereas you and I, if we miss a credit card payment, it's 29%. The payday loans can be thousands of percentage points in interest.
You're many levels away from what you're talking about, though, when you're talking about credit cards and payday loans. Now, the system is organized so that, as I'll put the BlackRock aside and take your word for it for now, but it's banks get the money at near zero or zero, and in some countries around the world, it's now negative interest rates.
Yes.
Because you're loaning that out to create economic activity.
Not always, though.
And
That's
fractional
the
reserves, and you're expanding that's how the thing works, how the system is supposed to work.
Well, they don't create
What would be the
economic.
alternate?
They don't create economic activity. They speculate with it. So that doesn't create.
They do home
That's
mortgage
but that's only some of it, Henry. So that's where you get the inflation. Is that yes, you'll have that, but we saw that during the economic crisis, and you had Bernanke coming back saying, "Hey, we keep giving them money, but they're not making loans," and they were instead, in many cases, investing money. Sometimes they even buy their own stock.
Well, they had to raise their capital reserves too.
Sometimes they even buy their own stock back with it to
Oftentimes.
drive up the price of the stock.
There's very minimal amounts of economic
Retail
activity in terms of growing the economy that happen in the financial system. The financial system, you have to look at it as a parasite on the economy, not a driver of it.
Money for the mortgages and the car loans, et cetera, and for the capital improvement.
We're not saying that this doesn't happen. Of course,
I know,
happens.
but you're talking about the system, so I'm trying to.
So Henry, imagine if they could do more than one thing, which they can, okay? And some of that money goes into mortgages, some of that money goes into other kind of loan devices, but then a whole lot of that money goes into stuff that has nothing to do with growing the economy
Most
at
of
all.
it.
Right.
A large
now
percentage
you slice
of it.
that off, but you still got to give them the money to do those other things.
Again,
Yeah,
if
and
you
they
had,
do it.
If
They
you
do
had
it.
more, and all it would take, and what we used to have more of, was just simple regulation on what you can and can't do with the access to that money. And what they've done is say, hey, listen, we think it'd be better for the overall economy if we can really do anything we want with it, and we'll still do that stuff, but let us do
Are
the
you
other
talking about
speculative
what Phil
stuff as
Graham
well.
slipped in the
That was
Clinton
part of it.
administration?
That was part
Yes.
of it. Yes, this is bipartisan by all means. In
Yeah,
fact,
the
you could-
Graham-Leach-Bliley Act.
Yes,
yeah,
you could
99, yeah.
absolutely argue that Clinton and then later with the failure of Obama to rein it back in, the Democrats have done more to
Alex
facilitate
is
this. than
causing
Republicans.
my brain to explode here because
I should. Most people don't understand the finance system. It's very bad.
Well,
it's
that
a
isn't
very
what I
bad
said.
system.
But I said you're for modern monetary theory,
No,
and
I
you
just
don't
read
want
it.
to be able to distribute the. How would you distribute the money?
Distribute what money that the Fed prints out, or
Well, if you got a whole alternate system, you can tell me about that. But how do you get the money into the economy? Modern monetary theory is that you circulate enough money to do whatever it is you need to do. You can run deficits because you can create the money supply, and you won't have.
Well, you can and do run deficits in every kind of economic system. I haven't seen one that hasn't yet.
Right, but the modern monetary theory minimizes the damage that running deficits do.
It doesn't minimize it. What it actually explains is that the damage that people are worried about is very real. Any MMT economist will still say that, yes, inflation is a real thing that absolutely happens and that absolutely needs to be planned and avoided for. What they'll usually argue with a mountain of evidence is showing that it really hasn't happened. So every time that people warn, don't do that or you get inflation, don't do that or you get inflation, don't you get inflation, when you look at our actual target inflation rates, we've missed them consistently for about 20 years. And so the inflation that you want, which is a sign of economic growth, like you're saying, as you're printing more money and expanding the money supply, we're actually missing on that. And that's part of my point, is that part of the problem, part of the reason is because far too much of that money is winding up in a very small place. And that's why we've had tremendous inflation only in a very narrow corner of the economy. Outside of like some certain areas like healthcare and education that you have inflation for very different reasons.
and that inflation is not counted in the official numbers.
No, it's not.
That's a very important point.
That's a very important point is correct. But the other part of that is that they'll say where you have had inflation, tremendous inflation, is on the stock market, is in asset prices, and things like high-end real estate. The top 1% of all real estate sales has inflated at an enormous rate. High-end luxury goods have inflated at an enormous rate, from clothes to luxury cars. The things that people in that 1% compete with each other to buy, you've had far more assets chasing far fewer goods. Where you haven't had that
We
problem.
should have inflation then.
You do. That's my point, Henry. That's what I just said. You have inflation in all those areas.
In what goods are you seeing the greatest inflation in?
Look at luxury goods, luxury cars, luxury clothes.
No. Look at middle class cars. They've grown
I don't know if you've listened to what I just said. They haven't had the inflation. They've mirrored regular inflation. So what I'm telling you is where inflation has been the most present in the American economy has been on the things that the 1% compete with each other to buy. So
why are we bothered that they're paying higher prices for their luxury goods?
I'm not bothered by it, Henry. I'm using it to help. Well, I don't care. I don't care at all. But what I'm showing you is that you brought up MMT and you're saying inflation's not a problem. I'm saying that it shows you where the inflation is. So where it's been a problem is that you have a lot of inflation there, but you don't have it on the regular goods because you have not put as much spending power into the vast majority of Americans that would cause them to chase the real goods that are developed at a way that outstrips our capacity to produce them.
Yeah, that's why the stock market's at record highs, and it's been hitting record highs for the last year, certainly since the CARES Act in March. So the inflation shows up, but it shows up in the assets of the wealthiest individuals and wealthiest institutions. That's where the money goes, and that has to do with the Cantillon.
It absolutely would follow, and it would show up in the regular economy too if you did things incorrectly. It's not. Nobody in MMT ever says inflation's not a problem. It's a very real problem. What they're saying is, hey, look, we just put $5 trillion in the economy.
What I am saying is that he said he was pro modern monetary theory, and then he doesn't like the system on how money gets circulated into the economy. So I'm wondering how you can implement modern monetary theory.
You said you didn't like the way it's circulated in.
Well, you talked about the problem of giving banks money
without regulation on what they could do with it. So we would very much like them to only be able to do the things that do grow the economy, such as making those loans and getting the money into the retail economy. And I think it's the regulations that we've peeled back, okay, going back to Graham Bush and even before that into the 80s, in terms of what else they can do with it that has no benefit on the economy as a whole.
Yeah, in the beginning of this was Michael Milken back in the 80s with his junk bond desk at Drexel Burnham and creating these huge pools of capital to jumpstart the private equity boom. And that was something that was hugely detrimental, I would argue, to labor and to the retail economy by allowing by creating pools of capital that allowed for these corporate raiders like Henry Kravis at KKR and Blackstone, TPG, all these big firms to buy up smaller, middle-sized retail places like the Toys R Us is
the
a
vulture
famous
capitalists.
Yeah.
Right, you know, that dislocates people. It harms individuals because they do those things. Mm-hmm. But when we talk about that, when we focus on that, one of the reasons we don't have inflation is because we have had a 20 to 30 year revolution in the economy that makes individuals the amount of products that are created, not necessarily by the individual themselves, but the industries work with less labor, which can be a problem for the people that are dislocated by that. But the prices are being held down because the labor costs are being flattened and compressed too, and the technological innovation that has happened has changed the way so many things are produced. That is part of it too. So I'll let it rest there.
No, don't by all means. And so here's a question.
Yeah, I agree with everything you just said. I totally agree. That's true.
Here's a question. What if instead of so much of that money that winds up in stock buybacks, right? That winds up in all other kind of non-investment vehicles that are that are not a plus to the economy at large. What if you weren't able to seek the return through those places? Then you would have to do more retail lending. I would argue that banks were way, way, way more beneficial to American society when that was the case. When they were when it wasn't as easy to securitize, the loans that they made and just boom, we're out. We close the loan, that's it. Somebody else owns it next. And it's just taking a skim off everything when they actually had more skin in the game. When you went to your bank and it was their money and they actually got hurt real bad if you didn't fulfill your loan obligation And that's why so much more underwriting was done back then. There was so much less bad paper back then. And then if you looked and you said, maybe there would be more infrastructure getting done. Maybe there would be a lot more of the investment that would actually improve the state of the country than if so much of it didn't just get bought and sold of the same things on the market, driving the price up so the return comes, and so that the stock, if we're buying our shares back and there's all activity and the stock goes up and that's how the CEO gets bonused and what have you, that, or lightning trading, or whatever example you want to give of things that don't add any benefit to the economy at all. They don't add liquidity or make the markets more efficient or attract investment for the reason that the company's doing the right things and is a safe bet, or any of the things that the economy and the markets used to be based on. If we got rid of those things.
But those things are legislative decisions you make. Those are things that you legislate. What I was talking about is, and maybe I'm projecting on Alex because having done the Bitcoin show for 3 years and seeing all the libertarians that would rail against the Fed on the show, and I would say, well, why do you hate America so much if you don't want the Fed in control? Because that is the tool of the empire to control the money supply that has the dominant currency in the world. And I'm wondering what you replace it with. So
I don't know that either of us said replace the Fed.
Well, I'm saying I projected on Fed.
I wouldn't say that. What I would say is if you're going to live in a capitalist economy, you need banks. And if you're going to have a fiat currency, you need an institution that can regulate that currency, produce it or buy it.
You don't need banks.
Okay.
Banks are on their way out. Those are a dinosaur. I was participating in my vulture capital trading, and 2 days ago on a different podcast, I gave a tip about something called Upstart, which is a company that went public about 3 months ago, and it is eliminating the need for humans in any kind of consumer lending. And through AI, you don't have to talk to anybody. They integrate it on the store's website, the auto dealer's website, whoever it is, the mortgage. So and I always thought it was like that, but evidently there's a whole nother little quantum jump we can take to make it even more cheap, efficient, it's
still banking. It's just a different way of doing it. Yeah, it's a humanist way. Right.
And they just bought one of the largest retail car organizations, one financial organization, and whoever works for there is on their way out. So a lot of the things that we have thought about as things that are around aren't going to be around anymore. Banks are one of them.
No, banks, what you're describing is the bank. It's just a different kind of bank.
No, it's an individual loan that you're doing with different entities. It's not one entity you're doing it with. It's just the software that company employs.
How is banking not that?
That is we are disintermediating the bank.
I understand, but if you still have someone making a loan and it goes through different products.
The company that is selling you the product is making you the loan through their software.
They become the bank.
They don't.
Sure, that's an old. like General Electric had a financial component in the 70s.
Old Sears card was the bank. That's like saying the old individual company credit card.
The bank that facilitated the Sears card was the bank.
The old grocery store that had the little ledger that.
Right. So where is this money coming from, and who's the company it's lending to? A bank of a different sort, right? How are they not a bank?
Upstart has to get loans to do what they do.
They have the capital good that you want.
Where do they get the capital good?
They've already produced it.
How?
They just made it themselves? Are they making currencies now?
No. If you are producing something, that doesn't... If you are the company that is producing the widget...
Right.
And you get your capital from however you get your capital, and you produce a widget, and you loan to party B.
Yes, you're a bank.
No, you aren't.
If you make a loan,
you're not
if you secure capital and make a loan,
you're making a loan.
Okay.
That's not a bank.
It's a semantic.
Yeah,
into a semantic argument.
If I make you a loan, I'm not a bank. If you say I need a new.
If that's what your business is, if you're
the
a loan shark,
selling you the widget.
You can do two things. You can like I was saying, the example of General Electric. They have a loan department, a financial department.
Used to run their own credit for their customers.
And they were a bank.
That's a
No,
banking
they weren't.
Of course
function.
they are. Of course it is.
Oh,
It's
they're running their own credit accounts. That doesn't make you a bank. We're
Okay.
going to go around in circles on that.
All right. You're getting a little right wing, Henry. Testy and always
I am just
the ghost of Rush Limbaugh in the studio
I
today,
remember
folks.
when words meant words.
All right. Last
Not
thing,
banks.
Last thing, while we're on infrastructure, is this going to get done? Look, this is something we had. When was it? Let me grab this quote real quick. This was a couple of years now, where we had the engineering organization that came out and gave the United States a C- in rating its entire infrastructure function. And we look like we're about $4.5 trillion behind on infrastructure investment if you add up all the bridges, all the highways, all the things the United States has to do. This seems like something that both parties always say they're for. It's an easy win because it's got tremendous majoritarian support. I don't know any American that says, no, infrastructure is great, we don't need to invest anything in it. Everybody loves it. It's usually polls somewhere between 60 and 80% infrastructure investment. Politicians of both parties run on infrastructure investment, and then nobody will ever touch an infrastructure bill. Will that change? Alex?
I don't see it changing in the Biden administration, although there have been a few things that have been sort of surprising from them so far. I hope it changes, but I mean, I'm not holding out a lot of hope for us getting the sweeping overhaul of our infrastructure that we need. So I'm not holding my breath.
Henry?
So the question is, will we get an infrastructure bill? Is that it?
Yes. Will we get one that passes?
There's two ways to pass it. You could pass it through reconciliation. If you do it through reconciliation, the individual senators, which is where it's going to come down to, can't specify specific projects. It's a blanket kind of bill that just passes.
Right, you can't load it.
So if you plan on passing it with the Republican senators, then by definition, you will have a bipartisan bill. So it really is one of those things that it's going to come down to the individual Republican senators. I don't know how many are up for re-election in 2022. If they want to run on the infrastructure they brought home to their state, brought home the bacon home to their state. If they do, we will get a bipartisan bill. If not, we will get a bill through reconciliation. Whether the bill through reconciliation will have as much comprehensive projects as you would hope for, that probably isn't going to happen. But I think we will get an infrastructure bill one way or the other.
And this is such an area where it makes so much sense to deficit spend because the economic impact of infrastructure is so great. So you have the immediate jobs, you have money spent directly into the economy, you have money going into people's pockets, but then you're also making metropolitan areas more dynamic when you improve their transportation systems, when you improve connectivity. We should be doing things with broadband access in an infrastructure bill and expanding that throughout the country. We are, for a long time have been behind most other wealthy nations in terms of broadband accessibility in the United States. And it's not just, again, making sure, from an educational level playing field in terms of, whether or not a lot of rural areas with a lot of rural poor families have easy, affordable, or even offered broadband at home and the difference that makes, to a student's life. But then also things like you've seen states and cities that have done these, where was it? Was it Knoxville, Tennessee? There was some town in Tennessee, mid-sized city, I don't think it was Nashville, that did this massive broadband where they made it free to all businesses. And they just did this really powerful free signal that they put out there. And the amount of investment that poured in, because it's a big expense if you're a large organization to have, large access to fast broadband. And again, it's something where you're building economic engines that then this is what has that economic impact, sort of what they talk about with tax cuts. They say, oh, you cut the taxes of the richest people and it trickles down and, they invest more, they spend more, and it's $10 for every one that you cut for them. And, the revenues that it produces, the tax money on that will more than take care of the shortfall of what you're cutting out. That always proves not to happen when we study it. But this is an area where the economic multiplier effect, which, it's very subjective and people like to throw it around. It's always speculative, but it actually happens with stuff like infrastructure. You actually have a drilling down where every dollar you spend does bring you 4 or 5 back. So it's such a win-win, and it's such an easy win, but it's almost like when whoever gets in charge, whoever has the ball, it's like the other team's like, well, we can't let them get this easy win. We have to get in the way.
And the bad thing is that everything you mentioned is needed, and the way it will be done will be obsolete by the time it's completed.
Yeah,
because
that's another part,
broadband, all these broadband
Yes.
systems, we don't need that because we have satellite, not satellite as in Dish Network, but the new high-speed broadband that you can have anywhere in the world now, thanks to Elon Musk. And you don't need the same highways we're driving on when it's autonomous semis coming down to the port of call for whatever they're picking up and taking it to the distribution center. So I don't know if we can have the senators. They can appropriate the money.
Well,
but
I don't think
if they can.
We're a long
it.
way before any highway. Our highways are way behind our current need, and we're a long way from those needs.
You don't think those will be there in 10 years?
I think they'll be there to an extent, but then I don't think in a way that they're so ubiquitous that you're actually not needing new. Because a lot of the roads, it's not just the capacity needs to increase; it's just that the roads are awful. A lot of the bridges, it's not that you need to have go from 3 lanes to 6; it's that it's going to fall down. So I think I would agree with the idea that we should be looking long term and not making investments that might not make sense in 20 years. I'm a huge proponent of the driverless cars, but I'm surprised how few people agree with me. So most people don't think it'll happen in our lifetime. I think we're 10 to 15 away before that becomes pretty omnipresent. I'd like to say within 25 years, nobody will be driving a car, and I think it's one of the best things that could happen. I've written about that extensively from, one, you would reduce those 30,000 automobile casualties every year to a very, very infinitesimal number. And then the other thing that you would do is you would help the carbon footprint immediately, because the efficiency in vehicles that increases when people aren't starting and stopping, and when vehicles are communicating with each other and moving. You could move at 35 miles an hour; it never really be that dangerous.
I think you're overestimating the time in many markets.
No, I'm deliberately overestimating, saying I hope it happens by then. What I'm saying is a completion. So would you say that you think nobody will be driving in less than 25 years?
But I can see by where capital is being put on the consumer side. For example, to bring up Elon Musk again, they already have a game division. They have the internet that's going. Well, first, their internet is going to go to the driverless trucks,
right,
or the other ships or whatever. Besides that, being able to serve rural customers. But they're already building the subsidiary in the company to build the entertainment center around you in the vehicle you're going to go. We are going, and Amazon and Tesla are competing to be the lifestyle vendor for you when you go from your home to your vehicle to work, if you still go to work, wherever you are. You are the end of. It's the age of the individual revenue stream.
It sounds like that movie Elysium, and I just hope I'm up there with it.
Yeah, me
Alex
too.
is going to fill in this week for Brendan's Bad Take of the Week, but we've got Alex's financial fiasco. What do we got?
All right, guys. I want to talk about something that happened last year that I think will have an even bigger long-term effect on our lives than the outbreak of COVID-19. And that is the opening of Chinese capital markets to Wall Street and other major financial institutions. And for those listening, a capital market, you can simply think of that as a market where debt and equity are bought and sold. As an example, think of our stock market in this country, the world's largest equity market. Now, for the first time in modern history, China has opened its doors to Wall Street to allow for not only the management, but crucially ownership of financial firms that operate in China. This means the largest financial institutions in the West are slowly but surely being allowed to access the major economic growth that's been happening in China over the last 20 years. And as we know, a battle is being fought between those two major economies, the two premier economies in the world. Yet, in the realm of finance, there is no evidence of this relationship breaking down. In September of last year, Citigroup secured regulatory authorization to become the first foreign custody bank in China, allowing it to hold securities on behalf of Chinese fund managers. In August, BlackRock, the world's largest asset fund manager, which we mentioned earlier, secured the go-ahead to run its own wholly owned mutual fund business. And Vanguard, the world's second largest asset manager, is currently in the process of setting up regional headquarters in Shanghai. JP Morgan, one of the most powerful players on Wall Street, is just completing a $1 billion buyout of a joint venture partner in asset management to give it full control over its Chinese international fund management. The bank also set in train a process to take control of its Chinese securities and futures joint ventures. Sorry for the jargon, everybody. Goldman Sachs, another Wall Street powerhouse, is meanwhile poised to buy out its securities joint venture partnership in a deal that could establish it as the first major fully foreign-owned investment bank allowed to operate in China. And the big question here is why? When U.S. rhetoric has become poisonous towards China, translating into damaging disruptions to Chinese manufacturers and existential threats to Chinese tech giants, why has Wall Street not been dragged into the standoff? And the answer is mutual expediency. It's the short answer. It suits the banks, asset managers, and insurers to be given freer access to what will soon be the biggest economy in the world, albeit one where profits in the short term remain elusive. If Western financial institutions are more embedded in the blood flow of Chinese economy, that also suits Western governments. A more predictable regulatory landscape underpinned by Beijing's 5-year planning system has reassured foreign money. Now, what does that mean going forward? The further liberalization of China's growing finance industry is an extremely exciting product for Western banks. Domestic bond yields are at record lows, interventionist Fed policies are keeping the stock market from crashing, and the prospect for a politically and economically stable America doesn't look great. Chinese capital markets offer something that American capital markets don't at the moment, long-term stability. Going forward, this means that asset management firms, investment banks, hedge funds, and private equity firms will all be looking to invest in China, not here in America. You only need to look to our neighbors in the South, Mexico, to see what happens when capital is pulled out of a country and moved to areas of higher return. What I was referencing earlier with James Tobin and international capital flight, the international virtual Senate that he referenced. So what happened last year, I think, is really historic, where Western firms outside of China have been allowed to go in and start taking over basic financial services. Like we were talking about earlier, banks do tons and tons of different things. They have many capacities and hats that they wear. So they're getting in there and starting to manage money. And I think if this continues, we're going to see more capital flight out of low growth zones like here in America, and it's going to start moving slowly but surely in the next decade or so over to China, which I think portends poorly for us.
Well, on that good news note.
Yay.
So give us a little bit more insight into terms of what that means for America.
Well, in my unrefined opinion, just looking at history, usually when an economy becomes the premier manufacturing economy in the world, it's slowly but surely transitioned to being the premier financial economy in the world. As Jamie Dimon, the CEO of JP Morgan Chase, mentioned, he thinks Shanghai and China will be the primary financial center in the world going forward, replacing the street in London and Wall Street here. And Ray Dalio, the CEO of the largest hedge fund in the world, Bridgewater Capital Associates, has said the same thing to hyper insiders. And I think what will happen is we'll start to see capital flight as these markets become more deregulated.
Explain what that will mean to the U.S. economy.
Even less growth than we're experiencing now. That will mean that there won't be, like we were talking about earlier, like kind of retail credit operations for American consumers and American small businesses. That capital will get dried up because the return on it is just not going to match what the return on those same loans is going to get you in a place like China. So I think going forward, it's just going to mean that the capital and credit lines, all these sorts of things are going to start to dry up, and it's going to become even harder to get things like a small business off the ground or even like a credit line.
And isn't that the part that we're missing the most in terms of like when we look at the things that banks aren't doing as much as anymore, as they're doing more of the investment and chasing returns and asset management. So when you brought that up, that's, I believe, still I believe that's going to the number one sector of our entire economy. It's the biggest thing the United States does is manage wealth for internationally. And when you look at that, you say, one of the things that people will consistently lament is that if you're just a guy going into your local bank and saying, I want to start a business and getting that kind of loan, that's an increasingly hard thing to ever see get done because most banks are like, fuck, no, we don't want to do that.
They see it as very risky.
Yeah, like no, that's a dumb place to put our money when we could put it in all these other more sure thing places.
Yeah, it's become, again, probably since the 80s, but certainly with the Commodity Futures Modernization Act, it's become far more profitable to speculate on things like derivatives and these sort of fancy financial products.
Or you can get big returns instead of just guaranteed return with risk, where it's like, that's not much of a return, and you might not pay the loan back, right?
I've read that Goldman Sachs makes about $60 million a day doing high frequency trading. Which again, that's one of those instances where there is no economic value to that at all. That's basically algorithm-based processing.
Trying to suck me back into this. I was trying to be quiet and let the show go down.
No, please. Anything
high
you want to say,
frequency
please.
trading is like the bacteria in your colon. People don't think the bacteria
full of shit and stinks.
It eats what you
Got
said.
it.
And makes you run more efficiently.
Oh.
It is leveling out the inefficiencies in the marketplace with the high frequency trading. Just like those little bacteria are eating.
How exactly is it doing that?
Because it's creating a more efficient market.
How?
Because if you could only execute a trade every hour, then the price that you offered wouldn't necessarily be the price.
But if you could trade with infinite speed constantly, you can't manipulate
then
the price?
The return will get smaller and smaller. $60 million isn't that much money for the market that they're talking about.
No, but I would argue that the methodology for high frequency trading from the perspective of the traders and the banks is to simply make a profit. They're not trying to make markets efficient. They're trying to provide the highest amount of return.
The bacteria
for
doesn't
their
know why
investors.
it's eating the poop.
So I would argue that when a bank, Citadel is an example of a pioneer in the high frequency trading. What they'll do is they'll purchase a stock, hold on to it for a few seconds, and then sell it once the price goes up a little bit in an effort to make a return. So to me, that has no economic function other than allowing for hedge funds to speculate and use their literal physical proximity to the exchanges to make trades very quickly and to make money. Where the economic efficiency that you're talking about, I just don't see it as being
And you don't
efficient
think
for the
individuals can
economy.
take advantage of that?
No, because the high-speed trading that happens, like I said, requires on one of the requirements is the physical proximity to the servers on the exchanges,
So the
like
multiple
Wall Street.
companies that exist in Sarasota and then in other cities around the world that do the same thing, that are willing to take your money and do algorithmic high-frequency trading for you, they aren't doing a benefit for the individual that brings them, the $10,000 or whatever they want to bring to them to put into the pool of money. They don't deserve
I don't know
the
what
return that Goldman Sachs gets. Or Citadel.
I don't know. I don't know about the theoretical example of the investor in Sarasota or what.
No,
their
it's not
method is.
theoretical. I've met the companies before.
Sure. Yeah. No.
The principals in the companies.
They can't take advantage of the speed
If they write a
that
better
the servers
algorithm.
do. Okay. Sure. I mean, I haven't seen examples of that, of people who are further away from the servers being able to take advantage of the speed of being that close. But you could be right.
You are right about the speed to the servers, but
Proximity does give you an advantage, right?
right. But you get to a certain level, they'll sell you the proximity. So.
Right,
Yeah,
but that's
it's not
still-
saying that nobody can do it, and it's also not saying that, like, look, it's the same thing. If somebody, like the example I gave of gold last week, if somebody buys a bunch of gold, fund, and then there's a run on, banks, and then the price of gold shoots up because people get nervous and they want to put money in gold, and that person made a lot of money, yeah, that's great for that person. And it doesn't mean that gold's value changed. It doesn't mean that there was, anything happening in the market that had any meaning whatsoever other than just a bunch of panic and anxiety that caused people to shift capital in a way that was beneficial for that one person. So that's the same thing with Lightning Trading. If somebody's selling that service, then yeah, you can be benefiting from it and getting money. You can give them money and get more back, but you can do that at a casino too.
Right now, because of Citadel, you can trade without commissions. The spreads are smaller. And when I was first started trading back in mid-90s, a low commission was considered $50. And the spread on a stock was a couple dollars. So, yes, they are making money doing that. And you can say, well, they have the advantage because they are. But it's allowed the market to become more efficient where I started this. And so I think that the amount of return that is made by that high frequency trading is insignificant compared to the democratization that is in the marketplace right now.
I would disagree that the market's democratized and certainly I think one of the reasons that it isn't is that there's not a level of financial literacy that people have.
I said the democratization of the market. I didn't say that the market was. The democratization means that individuals with lower wealth can come in and participate.
Sure.
That doesn't mean they are.
Yeah, there's more accessibility, absolutely.
Sure, yeah, there's more accessibility, yeah, absolutely. But I would also argue that, the places like Wall Street are very tightly owned and that their function is to provide returns for themselves. It's not to do anything necessarily beneficial for society. So I look
can be
at
agreed on.
So I look at their activities as being I think it's pretty easy to demonstrate are very detrimental to society given what they're allowed to do. And I think that's the key issue is given what they're allowed to do. And again, I would argue that high frequency trading is not beneficial and it doesn't have a market. It's not efficient in any sense to the markets outside of the major players. And an individual can't invest in Citadel unless they have a certain net worth. So there are certain retail aspects to the investment houses that provide barriers for just regular people. A place like Bridgewater Capital Associates, they won't let you invest money with them unless you have
or something, right?
I believe it's 10. You have to have $10 million that you're able to lose. So
somebody like Henry, yes, but somebody like us, no. That's not very democratic, Henry.
And I think we need to democratize finance in general to have a more equitable society, so that it's not a few people in 40-story office C-suites deciding what money gets invested where, when the profits are coming from, say, the pillage of a company like KB Toys, or the millions of dollars that are made by doing these very quick trades that don't provide any liquid or that don't provide any sort of stability in the system, or I think the regulating what the banks are allowed to do would be very beneficial to society.
I think you should have the last word on the topic. And I wish you all very efficient colons in the week to come.
Thank you. You too.
Believe me, I'm the one that needs the most at this table.
All right. I am going to get my vaccine, so next week I'll be licking both of your guys' faces. We'll be back every Friday, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks for tuning in, and get more at www.punkrockpolitics.com. Please like, subscribe, rate us on your server, and we'll see you next week.